They were called the families. They lived by a code older than the country itself, and for nearly a century, they ran America from the shadows. Every week, we open the files on the men who built the underworld, the bosses, the wars, the rituals, the betrayals, the blood oaths that bound them, and the secrets they swore to take to the grave. Subscribe. Some stories were never meant to be told.
The Rise and Fall of Vincent Gigante. Vincent Gigante had a foolproof defense mechanism, or so he thought: fake mental illness and conduct the Genovese family's darkest business under the cover of night. He operated under the bizarre delusion that FBI agents punched the clock and simply stopped working after midnight. Because of this, his trusted associate Pete Savino grew accustomed to terrifying late-night summonses, including one where Gigante asked if Savino could close or assassinate a man who had killed the son of a Genovese soldier. Savino agreed to the hit and even suggested a plan, but the target ended up imprisoned for another crime before the mob could get to him. But who was Pete Savino? In the gritty underworld, he was an anomaly. He read books, collected old Charlie Chan detective movies, and didn't fit the mold of your typical knuckle-dragging thug. By 1987, Savino had abandoned the deadly narcotics trade, but his past came back to haunt him when a former partner, Bobby Ferenga, flipped on him. Ferenga gave the feds the gruesome details about two corpses buried in a Williamsburg warehouse Savino once owned, and spilled the secrets of Savino's involvement in murders, drug deals, and a massive housing authority windows scam. Staring down the barrel of a 20-year sentence, the 44-year-old Savino made the ultimate choice. He agreed to wear a wire for the FBI. He secretly pleaded guilty to RICO violations and 6 murders, signing a pact that would forever alter the balance of power in New York's underworld. To keep Savino alive, the FBI orchestrated a brilliant disinformation campaign. FBI agent Dick Rudolph, Savino's main handler who met him secretly in motels, contacted Savino's mob-connected lawyer under the guise of inquiring purely about the Williamsburg warehouse's construction. The Genovese family swallowed the bait, believing Savino was in the clear and hadn't squealed to the authorities. Starting in February 1988, Savino walked the razor's edge, wearing a concealed body microphone into the heart of the Mafia. Incredibly, he was never once tossed or searched by a wise guy. While Gigante was too cautious to be caught on tape directly, Savino recorded dozens of hours of damning conversations with heavyweights like Benny Eggs Bonanno and Colombo enforcer Vincent Ricciardo. In one chilling recording, Ricciardo bragged about the cartel's absolute power, threatening a balky contractor by declaring, "Tuesday he's going out that window." Savino was skating on dangerously thin ice. Sammy the Bull Gravano, sensing something was wrong after the warehouse bodies were discovered, warned the Genovese family that Savino should be killed before he could betray them. But Bonanno shut Gravano down, stating, "Chin loves him," which effectively spared the informant's life for the time being. The wire-wearing operation came to a screeching halt when a mysterious caller rang Savino's wife, claiming her husband was a rat. Fearing his cover was blown, the FBI yanked Savino off the streets, and he vanished into the witness protection program. Gigante, realizing his catastrophic misjudgment, put a contract out on Savino. Breaking his own rules of extreme isolation, Chin reached out to other families for help, even having his consigliere ask Lucchese acting boss Al Darko if a contact in Hawaii could hunt Savino down. It was too late. The trap snapped shut on the morning of May 30th, when the feds raided Gigante's mother's apartment on Sullivan Street. The elusive Godfather was arrested exactly as he had lived his public life, wearing a bathrobe, pajamas, and a woolen cap. While the tabloids had a field day crowning him the Oddfather and the Daffy Don, his lawyer, Barry Slotnick, secured his release on a $1 million bond by waiving psychiatric reports claiming Gigante was completely deranged and unfit to stand trial. The climax of the sprawling investigation finally unfolded in a federal courtroom. The prosecution's star witness was none other than Pete Savino. Ravaged by terminal cancer, confined to a wheelchair, and looking like a skeleton, Savino testified via closed-circuit television from an undisclosed location. As the only defector to provide first-hand testimony of Gigante directly discussing murders and rackets, his grueling appearance utterly riveted the jury. The Teflon Act was over. Gigante was convicted, and Judge Jack B. Weinstein handed down a 12-year sentence along with a $1.25 million fine. Calling the once terrifying boss a shadow of his former self finally brought to bay, The judge believed the reign of the pajama-clad kingpin was finished. But as investigators would soon learn, a mafia boss doesn't always go quietly into the night. Step right behind the cold steel bars of the federal penitentiary, where the greatest act in the history of the American underworld finally met its stunning curtain call. Even after being locked away at age 69, Vincent Chin Gigante refused to break character. Deep inside the prison system, he continued his legendary masquerade, playing the part of a drooling, muttering madman while secretly retaining his absolute grip as the undisputed ringmaster of the Genovese crime family. But federal prosecutors were relentlessly closing in on his final secrets. In 2002, they dropped an absolute bombshell of a new indictment, charging the supposedly deranged old man with continuing to rule his blood-soaked Borgata right from his prison cell. The feds also nailed him with obstructing justice for faking his mental illness, the very con job that had miraculously delayed his previous trial for 7 long years. And this time, Chin's double life brought his own flesh and blood into the crosshairs. His son, Andrew Gigante, a wealthy container shipping executive, was indicted as his co-defendant. Far from being an innocent civilian, Andrew was unmasked as a key player who served as a vital courier, ferrying his father's ruthless commands to the mob and operating as a terrifying force on the New York-New Jersey waterfront. When the authorities hauled the pajama-clad godfather from a Fort Worth, Texas, prison to a Brooklyn courtroom for his arraignment, Chin stubbornly clung to his lunatic script. "I don't know what you're talking about," he sputtered when the judge asked for his plea. But the government had stacked a mountain of undeniable, devastating evidence that was about to obliterate his 30-year charade. Prosecutors had secretly videotaped and recorded the father and son in the prison visiting room, capturing Chin using sly hand signals and coded whispers to transmit his dark directives. Furthermore, a pair of lethal turncoats were waiting in the wings to testify. First was George Barone, a hardened 79-year-old waterfront mobster and hitman who shattered his oath of omerta after discovering he had been placed on Chin's own hit list over a bitter money dispute with Andrew. Then there was Michael "Cookie" Durso, a Genovese associate who had flipped to beat a murder rap. Durso had spent 2 years wearing a recording device ingeniously hidden in a Rolex watch. His secret tapes captured Capo Alan Baldi Longa bragging, "We're not because Vito, Genovese, ain't here no more. Vincent is." Another soldier was caught on the Rolex declaring about Andrew Gigante's authority, "Whatever the kid Andrew says, it comes from him," while pointing directly to his chin, the universal Mafia sign for the boss. Faced with this overwhelming avalanche of proof, the 75-year-old Chin finally broke. In April 2003, the Oddfather abandoned his act and pleaded guilty to obstructing justice and running his Mafia empire from behind bars. This shocking surrender added 3 years to his sentence, but its impact reverberated far beyond the courtroom. Copping a plea like a common street thug was an unprecedented capitulation for a Cosa Nostra godfather. Bosses simply did not surrender or beg prosecutors for deals. But Chin had a desperate motive: he was trying to save his son. Following his father's lead, the 46-year-old Andrew pleaded guilty to racketeering and extortion, accepting a 2-year sentence and a massive $2 million fine, a staggering drop from the 20 years he could have faced at trial. This arrangement, however, utterly shattered Chin's long-standing, self-righteous myth that he had shielded his children from the Mafia. The truth was exposed: he had deliberately set his son up in a nefarious enterprise, enriched him with mob muscle, and used him to keep the Genovese family in an iron grip. Chin's confession was also a humiliating slap in the face to the elite psychiatrists who had staked their reputations on his insanity. Experts like Dr. Louis D'Adamo, who treated Chin for 17 years, had sworn in court affidavits that the mob boss suffered from irreversible schizophrenia, while Columbia University's Dr. Wilfred G. Van Gorp had previously testified to his severe mental incapacitation. They had all been masterfully conned. With Gigante permanently neutralized and his seasoned commanders locked away, the Genovese family plummeted into a devastating tailspin. 2 crews were deeply penetrated by the informer Durso and an undercover detective known as Big Frankie. This infiltration sparked a wave of convictions in 2001 and 2002 that netted 6 capos and over 70 soldiers and associates. Their rackets were decimated, crushing their extortion rings, labor scams, and even a brazen plot to steal millions from the New York Times Employees Credit Union. In the end, Gigante's legacy was one of pure, venomous power. He had never taken a normal vacation, never frequented chic restaurants, and barely ventured beyond a 50-mile radius of his Greenwich Village birthplace. The curtain had finally fallen on his mad act, and he was shipped off to a correctional hospital ward far from his New York roots. Yet, even as an ailing old man locked away in his final days, Chin retained the swagger of a ruthless predator. When a prison guard asked if other inmates were giving him trouble, the dethroned titan practically spat his reply, "Nobody fucks with me." Picture a windowless, dimly lit room on the 22nd floor of an FBI building in Lower Manhattan. This secluded space, originally designed for administering polygraph tests to suspects and witnesses, served as the quiet sanctuary for FBI agent Jack Stubing. Stubing was a 45-year-old investigator legendary among his peers not for losing sleep over tough cases, but for his sheer, unyielding tenacity. Fellow agents described him as a watchdog who, once he sank his teeth into an investigation, simply refused to let go until he got results. Sitting in the dark, gnawing thoughtfully on a toothpick, Stubing organized his investigative strategies to the classical soundtracks of Beethoven, Copland, and Prokofiev. But as he pored over the intelligence files and agents' reports for the FBI's Criminal Investigative Unit No. 10, better known as the C-10 Squad, Stubing faced a bleak reality. His squad's recent results against the underworld were pitifully paltry. Their target was the Bonanno crime family, an organization that had fallen so far off the law enforcement radar that even rival wise guys were laughing at them and writing them off as an absolute joke. Nobody in the criminal underworld or the Justice Department was taking the Bonannos seriously as a threat. Throughout the 1990s, high-profile defections from other mafia families had provided the government with massive intelligence, but those major breakthroughs had ironically caused the FBI to minimize the Bonannos as an insignificant planet in the vast mafia universe. Even celebrity turncoats like Sammy the Bull Gravano had absolutely no inside dirt to offer the feds about the Bonannos. The reason was simple: the Bonannos had been expelled from the Mafia's ruling commission and entirely frozen out of the highly lucrative construction consortiums and other major rackets, leaving them completely isolated from the underworld mainstream. Despite the dismissive attitude of his peers, Stubing knew the Bureau was missing something vital. He recognized that the traditional investigative techniques, the wiretaps, bugs, and street-level informants that had successfully crippled the rest of La Cosa Nostra, were completely failing against this secretive crew. Stubing needed a radically different approach to crack the syndicate. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic brainstorm, and as Stubing himself admitted, there was absolutely nothing magical about it. Instead, the veteran agent decided to take a gamble on a completely unorthodox paper trail search. Stubing's brilliant new tactic was forensic accounting. By pivoting his squad away from traditional street-level surveillance and focusing entirely on following the intricate, hidden money trails, Stubing aimed to tear down the deceptive walls of the organization. The ultimate goal of this relentless financial manhunt was to lock the government's crosshairs squarely on the man responsible for quietly and effectively reinventing the Bonanno family in the shadows. That target was an emerging, highly insulated mafia titan named Joseph Charles Massino. Step into the gritty, high-stakes underworld of Queens and Brooklyn, where one mobster completely defied the typical gangster stereotype with his disarming politeness, unruffled demeanor, and a chillingly photographic memory. While other wise guys snarled and spat at the law, Joseph Massino, known on the streets as Fat Joey, remained soft-spoken and jovial, even while orchestrating massive heists and brutal massacres. Massino began his rise as a master hijacker and an underworld clearinghouse for stolen goods. He paid his crew handsomely to strip stolen cargo and transport it to secure drops like warehouses in Maspeth, dealing in everything from lobsters to televisions. His logistical genius forged a lucrative comradeship with a young John Gotti from the Gambino family, with whom he traded favors and fenced hot merchandise. Massino was also notoriously slippery. When FBI agents once raided a warehouse crammed with his stolen goods, he simply vanished through a rear escape route. In another brazen encounter, when an FBI agent cornered Massino's 350-pound enforcer on the street, Massino drove up, assessed the situation, shouted, "I gotta go to the bathroom," and sped away to freedom. But hijacking was child's play compared to the bloodbath Massino would soon orchestrate to seize absolute power. When the Bonanno family became fractured, Massino found himself defending the imprisoned boss, Philip Rostelli, against a deadly rebellion led by three renegade capos, Alphonse Sonny Red Indelicato, Philip Phil Lucky Giaccone, and Dominic Big Trinchera. Recognizing that it was kill or be killed, Massino designed a brilliant, preemptive military-style strike. He forged a secret alliance with the dangerous Sicilian Zips, importing unknown, untraceable shooters from Montreal led by Capo Gerlando George from Canada Xiaxia. The deadly trap was set for the late afternoon of May 5, 1981. Massino equipped a trusted, blonde-haired associate named Wayne Goldie Leisenheimer with police radio scanners and walkie-talkies to act as a lookout outside the ambush site, an illegal after-hours casino in Bensonhurst. The hitman, armed to the teeth, hid inside a large coat closet, waiting for Sciascia to deliver the fatal signal by running a hand through his hair. Believing they were attending a peace conference, the three rebellious capos made the fatal mistake of arriving unarmed, accompanied only by a soldier named Frank Lino. As the men entered the club, the closet door flew open and the hooded gunman leapt out, with one screaming, "This is a holdup! Everybody against the wall!" The room instantly erupted into a deafening slaughterhouse. Amidst the chaos, Massino physically grabbed Sonny Red and battered him with an object, while Sciascia leaned over and fired a final, lethal bullet into the capo's head. A terrified Frank Lino managed to survive by leaping over Big Trin's fallen body and bolting out the front door. With three bleeding corpses on the floor, Massino had to execute a flawless cover-up. He reached out to his old friend John Gotti, who agreed to have the Gambino family dispose of the bodies. The corpses were tightly wrapped in canvas drop cloths, bound with ropes, and loaded into a Ford van. Massino enlisted a Bonanno capo named Louis Tartaglione to drive the rolling tomb to a Gambino salvage yard in Brooklyn, where Gotti's men took possession of the gruesome cargo. Weeks later, the ever-polite Massino offered Tartaglione a chillingly understated compliment for his role in the grisly massacre, telling him simply, "You did a good job, Louie." Step right into the treacherous fallout of the FBI's Donnie Brasco infiltration, where paranoia gripped the Bonanno crime family and loyalty was repaid with a bullet. At the center of this underworld drama was Salvatore Anthony Vitali, known on the streets as Good-Looking Sal, a man who served as Joe Massino's most devoted acolyte since boyhood. The romance that forged their unbreakable bond began when a teenage Massino was selling Christmas trees on a neighborhood sidewalk, where he met, flirted with, and eventually married Vitali's older sister, Josephine. Massino became the ultimate big brother figure, teaching the young Vitali how to swim and, more crucially, how to survive the unforgiving streets of Bushwick and Maspeth. Vitali's early career hardly screamed Mafia royalty. After a brief stint in the army, he took a legitimate job as a corrections officer at a state rehabilitation facility for low-level narcotics offenders. Bored out of his mind, he quit after just 1 year to operate a roach coach for Massino, using the snack truck as a clever front to take illegal numbers bets at 500 to 1 odds. In his spare time, Vitali and his pals began pulling off petty factory burglaries without Massino's knowledge. But in the mob, there are no secrets. Massino confronted his 24-year-old brother-in-law with an offer he couldn't refuse, telling him that the imprisoned boss Phil Rostelli had heard about the scores. "If you're doing them, do them with me." Under Massino's expert tutelage, Vitali went on record and was thoroughly schooled in the dark arts of arson, bookmaking, hijacking, loan sharking, and money laundering. According to the FBI agents who tracked them, the two men were absolutely inseparable, though it was clear that without Massino's guidance, Vitali would have been nothing more than a gopher hawking coffee from the back of a truck. As Massino solidified his grip on the family, a brutal house cleaning was ordered to wipe the slate clean of the Donnie Brasco embarrassment. Frank Lino, the hardened soldier who had miraculously sprinted away from a bloody massacre of 3 rebel capos, was assured by Massino that he was not an intended target. Massino rewarded the terrified Lino with the position of acting capo over the crew once run by Bruno Indelicato. But for others, the FBI's sting spelled a brutal death sentence. Capo Dominic "Sonny Black" Napolitano was marked for execution as the ultimate penalty for letting an undercover agent infiltrate the family. Napolitano knew the grim fate awaiting him. Before heading to a meeting, the lugubrious capo handed his prized diamond pinky ring, his keys, and a wad of cash to a bartender at the Motion Lounge, admitting, "I'm going to a meeting and don't know if I'm coming back." Sonny Black's instincts were dead on. Lured to a house in the Eltingville section of Staten Island, Napolitano was greeted by Frank Coppa, who slammed the basement door shut behind him, signaling Lino to violently shove Napolitano down the stairwell. Waiting at the bottom was Robert Lino Sr., but his first shot either missed or grazed the target, and his gun jammed, leaving the capo sprawled on his knees. Staring death in the face, Napolitano gruffly commanded, "Hit me one more time and make it good." A second triggerman, Ronald "Monkey Man" Filicomo, stepped up and pumped several .38 caliber rounds into Sonny Black to finish the job. Lurking outside in a bakery van, Massino and George from Canada Sciascia waited as backup shooters just in case Napolitano managed to fight his way out of the cellar alive. The burial, however, was a botched amateur hour. Unable to find the pre-dug grave in the dark, the hitman frantically shoved the corpse into a shallow hole where it was discovered a year later. Massino coldly justified the hit to Vitali, boasting that he had to leave a receipt for Donnie Brasco. The bloody purge didn't stop there. Benjamin "Lefty Guns" Ruggiero narrowly escaped a mob execution when FBI agents intercepted him on his way to the grubby Holiday Bar in Lower Manhattan, a joint notorious for customers walking in the front door and being carried out the back. Agent Louis Vernazza leapt out of a Cadillac with a shotgun and shouted, "FBI! Freeze," saving a trembling Ruggiero from a certain whacking. Meanwhile, the hulking 240-pound enforcer and knife man Anthony Mira, who originally brought Donnie Brasco into the fold, went on the run to avoid the administration's wrath. Mira's demise was a chilling family affair. His own cousin, Joey D'Amico, received the murder contract from their mutual uncle, Alfred Al Walker Imberto, who stated the order came directly from Massino. When the cousins met at a lower Manhattan parking garage, D'Amico waited for Mira to unlock the exit gate from his Volvo, pulled a concealed pistol, and blasted his older cousin point-blank in the head. Inside one of Mira's boots, the police found $6,779 in cash that he had been using while on the run. While bodies piled up, Massino and Vitali played a high-stakes game of cat and mouse with the FBI's electronic surveillance. Suspecting that the bosses were using the J&SK Club for covert meetings, the FBI executed a daring black bag job, swiping keys from a drunken cleaning man at a local bar, duplicating them, and sneaking into the club at 3 a.m. to plant a sophisticated mini-microphone. But just 2 days later, the bug went completely dead. Vitali had utilized a brilliantly primitive counter-surveillance tactic, turning on a police scanner and having an assistant make noise or flush a toilet in the corner of the club. When the scanner picked up the audio feedback, Vitali zeroed in on a dropped ceiling over the main card table and ripped out the transmitter. Massino left nothing to chance, bringing in a mob-friendly technician known as Tommy Computer every 2 weeks to meticulously sweep the premises for bugs. Refusing to surrender their pricey state-of-the-art equipment, the FBI dispatched Agent Pat Colgan to aggressively retrieve it. Colgan managed to slip through the locked door behind a hoodlum, sparking a wild fistfight when the thug took a swing at him. As the entire room of mobsters closed in to attack the agent, Massino's voice suddenly boomed out, "Everybody cool it. It's just Pat." Playing the gracious host, Massino offered the federal agent a beer and handed over the microphone and transmitters, taunting him with a triumphant grin, "We found it the first day. Why didn't you just call? I'd have brought it to you."